Bit of an overload. Okay, so just before we begin, I'd like just to do a little bit of recap with one another around you. So just a couple of things. So see if you can finish. How would you finish the first sentence? The meeting of a core emotional need will increase a person's, and you fill in the blank. And then in what ways from last week can we promote connection and acceptance as a church family? Okay, so see what you can remember from last week. Okay, quick discussion and then we'll have some feedback. No looking in your notes, it's just from memory. This is called recall. No.
So there's a lock, there's an overall lock, and then there's the individual knobs. So, which are the two knobs then? This one is the ball, and then this is a lock everything. So theoretically. Unless it's up here somehow? Is this as tight as it goes? It's a little bit more, okay. I gave him a little room. Yeah, no, 100%. But this is 4K. So I go as tight as possible 4K. Is that a little too much room? Let's do 2.6. I'm not mad at 2.6. Marshall was mad at me for going out of... he tried zooming in my camera a bit, and then I unzoomed it, and he's like, who did that? Let's move that mic stand. Can you move the mic stand over here? Oh, okay. Just bring it over here. Just somewhere out of shot. Oh, we're not ready yet. Not ready yet.
Okay, we'll finish up the conversations. So the meeting of a core emotional need will increase a person's what? Appreciation, maybe. Resilience. I like that one. That's a good one. Coping skills. Yeah, it could well be. Any others? Well-being. That was the one. Okay. The others were very good. They were very good. But well-being, absolutely. Okay, very good. In what ways can we promote connection and acceptance? So you could be very specific from some of the things that we mentioned last week, or you could talk about there were 3 points, 3 ways specifically. What can you remember? Yes, Catherine? Vulnerability. Good, yes. What else? Empathy. Play. Well done. Excellent. You were listening. Very good. Excellent. Now, another question. How many of you, after doing the schema test, but particularly the positive schema test, by the way, if you don't have one of these, they are at the back available. How many of you, after doing the positive schema test, realized that some of your positive schemas were in the capacity of building connection and acceptance? How many of you noticed some of those? Interesting. There were some. Could you raise your hand so I can see? Okay, a few. Now, anyone remember what I said about the connection and or the disconnection and rejection schema domain, like the significance of it? Anybody remember? No, it's fine. So it's one that is the most common amongst humanity for some reason. It's one that has the most significance to all the others, but it's one that is the most common that we sadly are raised with, if that makes sense. And so that's why there's so much power biblically in our relationships to be able to undo a lot of that harm through, what is it called? Limited reparenting, okay? Now, why is it called limited reparenting and not just reparenting? Why do we think? Any thoughts? It can never replace it. And so what has been done has been done. But we don't need to be scarred by that forever, but there will maybe still be some remnants of that, even with the limited reparenting that God creates for us within his family. Does that make sense? So that's why it is limited. And it's also known as, remember, limited repair. So this is an incredible video. So last week, somebody asked a question in the middle of the talk about, is there a correlation or is it cause that brings about these, remember there was a study that said that there were the health impacts from bad relationships with parents, okay? And so it started out with the very early, and so I answered the question in person, but it started out that in the 1950s, they were seeing a correlation, but then later on, especially through the studies of Jeffrey Young and others, they saw a causation between the two. So it started out as a correlation. This particular video is well worth a watch. It is amazing. And this person here, he did a study and he's written a book basically saying that we can, through our relationships, we become healthier people, not only psychologically, but physically as well. And what he says is that actually when we go through disconnection and rejection, and just through life in general, it puts stress on our bodies. And so through our relationships, we're able to then diffuse that stress. We're able to cope with that stress simply through the power of our connection and the ability to accept one another in God's family. That's pretty amazing. So that's all that we've been reading about in the scriptures, of course, through our relationships, but we're seeing it, as I said, more and more through science. So it's very faith-building as you watch this video. So please watch that if you can. There was also some homework last week, if you wanted to do it, which was to study out the Bless Me to My Father study guide. That was emailed to you. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, no problem. But if you would like to, it is there. And I also sent out two studies or two videos about particular schemas that related to connection and acceptance. Those two videos were very, very good. There's a church in New York who is also doing this similar course to us, and they analyze the schemas in a lot more detail than we have the time to do. But they are there available on YouTube. So please go back on your emails and have a look for those if you think that would be helpful, okay? Quick thing, as I said, if you would like to investigate a little bit more, these are two books that are worth reading. This is the one by Jeffrey Young. If you want to take a look at it today, just to have a scan through and see if you would like to order it for yourself, I'll leave it up here at the front and you can take a look and see if you'd like to read through that. It is kind of a little bit of a textbook in some ways, but it's a really good read. Okay? Any questions now before we begin the material? And the reason I'm asking that is that once we're recording, because this goes out live, we're also sending it to the campus students. If we could not ask questions in the middle of the presentation, it stops the flow. But if you do have any questions now, then we can take those questions on the front end. Anyone got any questions? No? All right, we will begin. So as I said, last week we looked at the maladaptive schema domain of disconnection and rejection. Today we're going to look at impaired autonomy and performance. Okay, impaired autonomy and performance. So autonomy, just the ability to do things for yourself, the ability to think for yourself. Okay, the schemas that fall into this schema domain are a vulnerability to harm or illness, dependence, incompetence, enmeshment, and undeveloped self. We'll talk about some of those in a little bit. But let's get a definition of healthy autonomy first of all. So these slides will all be sent out to you as well, but you are welcome to take pictures if you'd like. So healthy autonomy means having a good relationship with who? With yourself. What is it that we know? Love your neighbor as yourself. The problem is, some of us don't love ourselves as healthy as we should. Okay? So, therefore, we don't even then really know how to love other people. So this unlocks this ability to love ourselves through knowing ourselves really well. And in doing so, healthy autonomy means that you're able to access your real feelings about yourself, but also what you need, and have an ability to be able to express what you need to others. You have a clear sense of knowing who you are and what you want. Okay, so we'll go through this in a little bit more detail in a moment. If you have had any of these exasperation interactions from your parents growing up or from others, particularly the ones in red, belittling, so being put down, controlling what you do, eat, where you go, in an unhealthy way, this is. If you've had overprotective helicopter parents, or just pessimistic negativity within your household, then you are likely, not always, but likely to develop unhealthy autonomy. So an inability to be able to make healthy decisions for yourself, okay? So some of those things, what they do is they rob you from your self-autonomy, from being able to think and make decisions for yourself. And in doing so, what happens is you develop these life traps. So vulnerability to illness or harm. Remember, there is absolutely a connection between a lot of these schemas and a physiological manifestation of those in our well-being. Not just mental well-being, but even our physical well-being. There can be a dependence on other people. So not able to make decisions for yourself, needing to know what someone else thinks before you do it, a feeling of incompetence, that you're not really capable of doing your best or doing what needs to be done. Enmeshment with a parent and not being able to be separate from them and their thoughts, still calling up and saying, hey, I'm thinking of doing this, what do you think? It's quite often when people get married and then the husband is still calling their mother and telling them all about, what they're doing, or getting permission, checking it with their mom first. That's enmeshment. Undeveloped self. So still maybe being an adult, but still just not being where someone should be by their age. Abandonment. Instability. So just maybe flaky in relationships, not really able to commit. Subjugation, just feeling lower than people and not feeling good about yourself, and a sense of failure. So all of these things come from an unhealthy autonomy. Okay, so they're very significant. So what I'd like you to do just to begin with is just to think about, why is healthy autonomy essential for us as Christians? So the definition is up there. Talk about it with each other for a couple of minutes. See if you can think about why, and see if you can identify any scriptures that you could use to back up what you're saying. Okay, so have a little discussion. Why is it so important as Christians in particular? Let's see what you have. Okay, any volunteers? Otherwise, I'm going to call on some people. Billy. Sorry, 1 second. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So just to feel confident in who we are, the Spirit lives inside of us, not grieving the Spirit. Yeah, I like that. That's good. Yeah. Meridian.
Part of the scripture where it says those who will be entrusted with little will be entrusted much.
Okay.
And I feel like if you're not responsible, if you're not self-aware, if you haven't developed these things at a certain age, then God can't give you things to do. You're stuck.
Yeah.
Because you can't make those small steps. God can't do great things with you if you can't achieve internally yourself first.
Yeah. Good. Did everyone hear that? No, not a word. Okay. So he who is entrusted with little, more will be given to them. And so the idea of if we feel like we've held ourselves back in any way, then maybe our development is limited and halted somewhat. So then more cannot be given to us because we maybe feel like we don't have the capacity for more. Or is that what you're saying? Did I do a good job? No, sorry. Okay, let's move on. Okay. Anyone else? Joe. You said it much better than me. You did.
So my word for the year is surrender, right? So I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, so if I surrender to God, right, then I kind of get that from Him, right? So every day, you pray in the morning and you say, God, let your will be done. I surrender to your will, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of gives you a little synopsis of, what you feel the Spirit's, kind of like Billy said, what the Spirit's telling you to be that day.
Okay.
Every day is different. The next day could be something else.
So surrendering to God.
Yeah, it changes every day.
Okay.
Every day is different thing depending on what the Spirit's telling you.
Okay, thank you.
When I think about health, I always think about balance.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like in a forest, if you've got too many beetles, all the trees get destroyed. In the same way, if you're spending too much time socializing and you don't work out, or you spend too much time reading your Bible and you don't have time for people, or you don't have time for your career, health always means balance in my mind. I don't know if that's how scripturally rooted that is. I'm sure there is some basis for it, but like when I'm the most balanced, I'm the most happiest and I'm the most healthy.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, thank you. We'll have Oscar next.
I was thinking of a scripture of Proverbs 25. It says, "The purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out." So I think about to understand your own heart and to dig in there, to expose what your purpose is,
Yeah.
what God's purpose is in your life, the deeper meanings of your personality, your path, and to grow essentially.
Okay.
I think that's why it's essential for a Christian to know thyself.
Yeah.
Healthy autonomy.
That's good. If you look at the words that I've highlighted, if you don't know how you feel and you have difficulty just identifying your feelings or what you need or who you really are and what's really going on, what will that do? It will hold you back, won't it? And it stops you from being able to make good judgments based on where you are at and where God is trying to lead you to. So here's a few scriptures that I thought of connected to this. So Hebrews 5:14. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to distinguish between good and evil. And so when we have a really good sense of self, by training our mind, we are able to then discern between good and evil. You're in a much better place to make the right choices when you know how you feel, you know what your needs are. It's a lot easier because you're more in tune with who you are and what is going on. Does that make sense? But it says here that takes training to do that. So it's connected to all of these maladaptive schemas. Look at the next one, Philippians 1. This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless until the day of Christ. So again, there's a knowledge of self that is involved here to then be able to discern what is best. There is a depth of insight that is needed in order for us to be able to grow spiritually. That's what God wants for us. But if we don't really know how we're feeling, what our needs are, what's going on, then it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to grow in this area. Finally, our theme passage for all of this, Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. You know, in the NIV it says test and approve God's will, but it's not a good translation. It means to discern, that God wants us to be able to have this spirit of discernment ourselves. This is not something that God will do for us. He wants us to have the ability to discern what is best for us. Does that make sense? That's why this schema is so important, that we have healthy autonomy, we have a personal healthy ability to be able to discern for ourselves, not looking for someone else to tell us what is right or wrong, because we all have the Spirit of God living inside of us, as Billy referred to. And wasn't that God's plan all along? Yeah. And so this is why this one is very, very key. But thankfully, we have the ability through limited repair, limited reparenting, to overcome these through our relationships as well. And so what God wants us to do is to develop a sense of self-advocacy. Have you heard of this term before? This means the ability to communicate what you need, what your needs are. This is something that I'm trying to work on at the moment. And it's not easy, okay? And when you do this, self-advocacy has 3 elements to it. The first one is trying to understand your needs, and we'll talk about this a bit later on in the lesson, knowing what kind of support might help, and communicating these needs to others. So in a nutshell, that's what healthy autonomy looks like, that you're able to defend for yourself. You're not needing to rely on someone else to tell you what your needs are, where you are at spiritually, but you are able to determine this for yourself, okay? And then go after it for yourself as well. And we have this beautiful family to which we can then go and talk to one another about our needs. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So as I said, limited reparenting is providing within the appropriate boundaries of a relationship what a person needed but did not get from their parents as a child. So we can provide that to some degree through our relationships. Okay, so there are 3 parts to how we repair and connect for healthy autonomy. And once again, they all come back to the power of our relationships. So the first one comes from gaining awareness through self-reflection and taking feedback from other people, okay? How many of you just love taking feedback from whoever it's from, no matter however it comes? Oh, none of us. All right, sometimes. Right, let's go there for a second. When is feedback good feedback?
They agree with you.
When we agree with that person. Okay. What else? Depends on who the person is. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. Okay? We have this amazing group where we are family, we are friends, where God has created the perfect environment for us to be able to give and take feedback. But does it always go well? No. Okay? Cherie, so Cherie, she was a faculty manager in the UK, and she had to go on a course of basically all about feedback. And the person that did the training course said, feedback is a gift. And I thought, what a powerful way to look at it. It's a gift. Someone is giving you just maybe a window into your blind spot, a window into something that they see that you don't see. What a beautiful thing to have. But we don't always embrace it as a gift, do we? Because it triggers us, so maybe the way that they said it, and we become wrong spotters. And we look for oh, but you said it with that tone. I saw you roll your eyes. Whatever it might be, okay? We wrong spot instead of really learning to embrace the feedback, okay? There's a really good book called Thanks for the Feedback. I don't know if any of you have read that, but if you find it difficult in accepting feedback or even learning how to give feedback to others, this book, I'll put it up on the slide in a second. But the other thing about feedback is that again, it's not something that we should be just offering unless the person wants it. Yeah. So it's really useful just to say, hey, can I give you some feedback? The person is then very unlikely to say no if you put it that in such a nice way, okay? They're gonna be like, sure, because they know that you're already being considerate by even asking that question. The problem is when we try to give feedback to people when they're not even ready for it. And then what are they? They're immediately maybe on the defensive. Okay, but it's much less threatening when we're able to say, hey, can I just give you some feedback? So today, Steve, myself, and Ben, we met to plan the sermons from now all the way through September. And so we also then I said, okay, before we get into planning, let's give each other some feedback on our preaching. And it was really good. And I said, first of all, Steve's gone. He's out. He's not even here. There it is. But first of all, I said, why don't we think about what God is telling us and showing us that we need to grow in on our preaching. So we all went around and we shared. And one of mine was actually got some really good feedback from Mark Shaw on just being more vulnerable in my preaching by sharing the stories of maybe what I'm learning, what I'm going through, how did I get from A to B. Really great feedback. So I was able to share that in today. And then we went round. But it was so encouraging, giving each other feedback in a very non-threatening, welcoming way. And I think all of us were able to grow. And it was great because, Ben's the young guy, but he was able to give feedback to me, give feedback to Steve. What a healthy environment that was. So hopefully you'll see some improvements. But that's what we need to, we really must go after actively, be proactive, asking each other for feedback. In your small groups, hey, can you give me some feedback on this, or whatever it might be, okay? But go after it, seek it. When we do that, we then get to grow, obviously in our vulnerability like we spoke about last week, but we also get to grow in our self-reflection, because then we go away thinking about what that person might have said to us. Does that make sense? Yeah. You then become more aware of who you are, how you can grow, and then you're more likely to ask next time as well for that. So do you remember this movie, Ordinary People? Okay, so this is now the end of the movie, and things have just got really bad. If we could get the lights, please, that'd be fantastic. Things have just got really bad. The mother has not been able to move on at all. This is quite a long scene, but it's really worth watching. The father eventually opens up to the wife, to his wife, about how he feels and about how disconnected she is, and the fact that she's losing her family, her son and her husband. But she's not able to handle the feedback. However, there's a really encouraging bit at the very end where the son and Connie and him are able to have a really bonding moment through accepting feedback. Okay, so you'll see the difference. Put myself out there for you to read where I was coming from. And so that's part of this process of being able to develop, remember, healthy autonomy is expressing what we need. Imagine if the wife had said, hey, this is what I need. this is how I'm feeling. But she could never really get to that place. So this is the book that I was talking about. Thanks for the feedback. So this first point, just take the time to seek feedback, okay? Ask for it. When we're in our relationships with one another, ask, can I give you feedback? Take the time to reflect upon it. Not all feedback may be right, okay? But maybe if God is telling you the same feedback from different sources, maybe it's worth listening to, okay? And just think about it. Are you able to handle feedback? Or is there something in you that gets triggered? And then try to figure out, what is that trigger? Could it be a schema? Could it be a coping mechanism? Okay, why is it that you find it difficult to accept that? If you find it difficult because of what the person or how the person is saying, try to look beyond that, but then you can still address maybe their tone or their approach separately, okay? All right. Secondly, and this is where we'll finish up for today, embracing conflict and being vulnerable through reconciliation help to repair and reconnect, and they also help to develop healthy autonomy, amazingly. Okay, so what happens is, quite often, especially within, you may find this if you're a parent, you may remember these if you, when you were being parented yourself, or even in day-to-day relationships, if you're married, sometimes we can get into conflict with people, and we get into something that's called a vortex of conflict escalation, where you just keep going round and round and round, and there's just no way out of it. Anyone been there? Yes, okay. So a vortex of conflict escalation. There is an escape arrow, and that arrow is vulnerability, okay, which is what we spoke about last week. And so we're going to watch a short clip now, which is from We Bought a Zoo. Anyone watch that? Yeah. Okay, good movie. Yeah. And so we'll see a couple of scenes from here where we see the conflict, we see the conflict escalation, and then we'll also see
if only I could talk to her about
his needs, express his feelings. The dad is not asking for those. He's overwhelmed maybe with this new venture, losing his wife. Very complex. But what we're seeing there is that he's not allowing for healthy autonomy for the boy. He feels restricted. And so there's this disconnection that is occurring. So we'll come back to that story as we finish up the evening. So when we consider repairing, whenever we may have a conflict with one another or with others, try to figure out, like I said, what is it that has triggered me? Why did this trigger me? Try to get an outside perspective. So, hey, this is what happened in my marriage. This is what happened in my discipling partnership. What do you think? Get an outside perspective. Be calm, be vulnerable, and be in the habit of resolving quickly. So we're gonna look at this just in a little bit more detail. So when we do the I Choose Us marriage program next year, we'll be using this a lot. And this is a conflict resolution strategy that explores vulnerability and allows us to be able to share openly and vulnerably with each other, expressing needs and feelings. I know some of you in the room who we've gotten with have already used this and are helping you with this. But this is a really useful tool, not only in marriage, but also in parenting and in our one another relationships. Because sometimes, even though we're brothers and sisters, we can still bump with each other. Would you say that's true? Yeah. We can rub each other the wrong way, say things that are not very loving or Christ-like at times. And so we need help sometimes to be able to resolve those conflicts. What does Satan want to do with those conflicts? Make them worse, divide us. Okay, Bible says, leave no room for Satan. Okay? And this is a really good way, as I said, within all kinds of relationships to be able to do that. So we will send these out, but this is so key in us learning how to express our needs and our feelings so we can grow in healthy autonomy. So let's say we have a conflict. Cherie was supposed to be here, but she's not feeling too well. And she actually did this today with one of our sons. They had a bit of a conflict just before we left for church. And so she was going to share, and I won't share on her behalf, but I'll share theoretically today. So what you do is, let's say we have a conflict, and you first of all identify what was my weakness that was triggered in this conflict, okay? And so you might say, my weakness is that I can blame other people. I'm quick to blame. I'm quick to point the finger. Or I'm critical, hypercritical, I'm harsh, I'm quick to become angry, I'm a perfectionist. You identify what is your weakness in this that has caused, that is at play in this conflict. Does that make sense? Try to use the schemas where possible, because then you'll get to understand yourself more and more. So let's say I'm resolving a conflict with Cherie. I would share this first of all. And what this immediately does is it helps Cherie to understand that I get myself. I understand myself. She's then much more likely to listen to what I've got to say rather than be kind of defensive. She's a lot more, it's less threatening when I'm coming with a flag of surrender saying, hey, this is my weakness. Does that make sense? It's very powerful. Then, the next thing I share is what were my underlying fears connected to this conflict. So maybe I would say, I was afraid that I wouldn't be heard, or I was afraid that you would just shut me down, or I was afraid, if it's a financial conflict, I was afraid that we were gonna, not have enough money to pay the bills. So try and identify what is the fear. And usually there's a fear that's driving this in some way. You're really getting deep, trying to understand what is really going on, okay? Next part. What were your needs? What did I need in this conflict from the other person? So I might say, hey, what I needed from you was just for you to listen, try to listen to what I was trying to say. I needed empathy. What I needed was a chance for you to give me a chance to speak or to understand how I was feeling. Okay, what I needed from you was just to be a bit patient before you just immediately spoke back, or whatever it might be. Think about the need, express that. Next, what were your feelings? Okay, how did the interaction make you feel? I felt shut down, I felt oppressed, I felt hurt in some way, I felt belittled. Again, try and think about maybe some of those exasperation interactions. Then, what should I have done differently? You take responsibility. So I should have been slower to speak, slower to become angry. Okay, try and identify, if you were to go through that situation again, how would you have handled it next time round? Because then you're showing the other person your repentance as well. Okay, and then finally, you apologize very specifically for what you did wrong in that situation. Okay, so I'm sorry for shouting at you. I'm sorry for raising my voice. I'm sorry for being impatient. Please, will you forgive me? I don't know how we do with forgiveness, but putting that out there, will you forgive me? Doesn't just leave it, just in space. It invites connection. Okay, so this is a very, very powerful tool that we've been using probably for the last 9 years in our marriage. And we have conflict from time to time, but we always go to this. And now we're at a place where we don't even need to use this model in this way because we just understand each other so much more. Okay, so please feel free to use this. It's very helpful. But remember, the reason why I'm showing it you is because it helps us to have healthy autonomy, because we're more likely to start learning how to express our feelings, our needs, and our weaknesses, to discern good from evil, discern righteousness, okay, as the scriptures call us to. Okay, then we get to a place of real, genuine forgiveness. Dr. Everett Worthington and Dr. Robert Enright said, Dr. Worthington writes this about forgiveness. In genuine forgiveness, one who has suffered an unjust injury chooses to abandon his or her right to resentment, retaliation, and instead offers mercy to the offender. Forgiveness isn't just, so at the end of this conflict today, my son, when Cherie apologized, he said, I forgive you. So I called, and then he walked away. So I called him back. And I helped him to work through this. What is real forgiveness? It's no rolling of the eyes. It's no quickly walking away. Okay? It's offering mercy. Offering mercy. You guessing who it was? No. Offering mercy to the offender. So it's not just left there. What does that mean to offer mercy to someone when they say they're sorry? Yeah. That's powerful. Yeah. It's inviting more dialogue. Yeah. It's inviting deeper and greater connection. When we just like, oh yeah, I forgive you. And that's the end. No. Do you really mean that? Or are you just going through the steps? Yeah. This is all about that deeper connection, healthy autonomy, especially with our feelings. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so this model, by the way, that I have here, all of that, we do find it in the Bible. And if you remember the passage in Luke 18, where we have the tax collector and the Pharisee, remember that? And the Pharisee is like, I do this, I'm awesome. And the tax collector is beating his chest, Father, forgive me. What we see, if you look through that text, we see that he has an air of weakness about him through his posture. He goes to God with, I'm a sinner. He recognizes his weakness and where he is at before God. He identifies his feelings and how his relationship, how he feels about his relationship with God. He beats his breast as a sign of sorrow. And he says to God, he goes to God by expressing his need, therefore inviting God's mercy. We see this scripturally. This is so powerful that it can be so impactful in our relationships. As I said, in our marriages, in our parenting, in our relationships with one another. In Ephesians 4:25, we're told, put away falsehood and speak the truth to one another, for we are members of one body. It's quite easy, isn't it, sometimes, in a church of almost 300 people, to kind of be a bit false with each other. And there's been a conflict, you feel a bit distant, but you never really get or seek the reconciliation. It's easy to do that. But what does the Bible tell us? Matthew 18, go to the person. If it doesn't go well, get someone else involved. But never is just to leave it. Okay, so think about who is there that maybe you need just to be reconciled with. That's a great opportunity to grow in your healthy autonomy. Okay? So let's watch the end of the movie now. So they've had this conflict. We saw it escalate. There was no way out. Okay, that's what it takes for us to really deepen our relationships with each other, to get to those places. It feels uncomfortable. When you start doing that conflict resolution, it's not easy because you're bearing yourself before one another emotionally. And I forgot to say that once one person goes through that list sharing, then the next person goes through that as well. So you go first, and the other person goes through. But as I said, it's very powerful. Okay, we're going to finish up here. So that's the end for today. What I'd like you to do is to just think about what will be your takeaway from today's workshop, from today's lesson. There's also going to be sent to you, hopefully tomorrow, a study guide. If you would like to read it, it's there for you, on the power of vulnerability. So it's a really useful study. It goes into a little bit more detail than what I've been able to cover just in tonight's session. But I really liked this quote because it really ties into what we've been looking at. Vulnerability is the essence of connection, and connection is the essence of existence. Isn't that powerful? Very powerful. In order for us to truly connect, we need to be vulnerable. But connection is what our whole life is really all about. Okay, for us to be the healthiest version of ourselves, we need one another. And God has given us that. And we should be really grateful, but also make use of that in our relationships. Okay? So just have a little discussion. What's your one takeaway? And then maybe you could just pray for one another, and then we're finished for tonight. Okay? All right. Wonderful. And the book is here if anyone wants to take a look at it at the end.
Oh,